when my mom took me to that park bench at 12 to tell me I was autistic. She didn't know she was shaping the first autistic person who would one day serve as a presidential advisor. And I had no idea this conversation would change not just my life, but the lives of millions like me. My name is Ryan Mitchell, and this is my story. It was a crisp October afternoon in 1999 in East Brunswick, New Jersey. Sunlight filtered through the golden oak leaves as we walked in silence through the park where I used to run whenever home felt too loud, too overwhelming. My mom, Sarah, had that look I knew well, the same look she had when she needed to tell me something important, something difficult. "Ryan, do you remember why we went to the doctor last week?" she asked, her hands nervously smoothing her skirt. I nodded. Of course I did. Endless questions, strange tests, people watching every move I made as if I were some science experiment. But at 12, I didn't have the words for the frustration I felt, for the sense that there was something fundamentally different about me, that everyone could see except me. "The doctor said, you have something called autism," she continued, her voice trying to sound casual, though I could hear the tremor. "It means your brain works a little differently than other people's. But that's not a bad thing, Ryan. It just means you're special." Special. Back then, that word sounded like a social death sentence. I already knew I was different. The other kids reminded me every day at school. How they whispered as I passed in the halls, avoided sitting near me at lunch, laughed at the repetitive hand movements I later learned to call stimming. "What does that mean?" I asked, my voice louder than intended. "It means you're really smart, but sometimes social stuff can be harder for you. It means you can see the world in ways others can't. And it means," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "I will always love you exactly as you are." Sitting on that bench, watching the leaves dance in the wind, I couldn't imagine this conversation would be the first step on a journey that would take me into the halls of power in Washington, D.C. I couldn't predict that one day I'd fight, not just for my own acceptance, but for the voices of millions of autistic people who, like me, were talked about but never truly listened to. In the years after my diagnosis, I was bombarded with a narrative about myself I didn't recognize. I read articles portraying autism as a tragedy, stories of families destroyed, kids lost to a mysterious condition. Ads depicted people like me as trapped by our own brains. Experts, none of them autistic, debated our lives, futures, and rights as if we were lab specimens instead of human beings. That's when I realized a fundamental truth. The world was talking about us, autistic people, but no one was asking what we actually thought. No one was listening. That realization led me, at 18, to co-found the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, ASAN. Our mission was simple but revolutionary: ensure autistic people had a seat at the table in conversations affecting our lives. Our motto became "Nothing about us without us." But I never imagined this philosophy would be tested in the most public way possible when, in December 2009, I got a call that would change my life and potentially the lives of the entire American autistic community. It was the Obama administration. They wanted to appoint me to the National Council on Disability, the Presidential Council advising on policies for people with disabilities. If confirmed, I'd be the first autistic person in history to hold this position. What followed was a battle that exposed deep divides in the autism world. War between those who wanted to fix us and those who believed we deserved to be heard as we are. It tested every fiber of my determination and forced me to confront a fundamental question: who gets to speak for us? This is the story of that fight. The story of how a young autistic person from New Jersey stood up to some of the most powerful autism organizations in the country. It's about betrayal, courage, politics, and, above all, the transformative power of a community that refuses to be silenced. If you believe our voices matter, if you believe autistic people deserve to be part of the conversations shaping our lives, this story is for you. Subscribe, like, and hit the bell, because our story is just beginning. You're part of it. Let's discover together how a single presidential appointment became a turning point in the fight for autistic rights. The months after my diagnosis felt like living in two parallel worlds. Out in the real world, I was still the weird kid at school who talked too much about obsessive interests and couldn't read basic social cues. But inside, a quiet revolution was happening. For the first time in my life, I had a name for my difference, and with that name came an insatiable hunger for understanding. I dove into the internet. It was still in its early days, in 2000s, searching for everything I could find about autism. What I discovered shocked me. The dominant narrative about people like me wasn't just negative, it was devastating. Medical articles spoke about burdens on families and epidemics that must be contained. Parent organizations talked about recovery and cures as if our existence were a disease to be eradicated. Then, in a small, obscure forum online, I found something that would change my perspective forever. I discovered other autistic people, real humans, speaking for themselves, sharing their experiences in their own words. Hi, my name is Jim. One post read, one I'll never forget. I've been autistic for 35 years, and I am not lost. I am not a tragedy. I am not less human because my brain works differently. I am just different. It was 2001, and I was 14 when I read Jim Sinclair's post, one of the pioneers of the autistic self-advocacy movement. His words were like a light slicing through years of darkness. For the first time, I heard an autistic person describe autism not as a tragedy, but as an identity. I started participating actively in these forums. The community welcomed me in a way I had never experienced. Here, my intense interests weren't pathological obsessions. They were special interests. My repetitive movements weren't problem behaviors. They were stimming, a natural form of self-regulation. My difficulty with eye contact wasn't rudeness. It was a legitimate neurological difference. Ryan, wrote Amanda, a 25-year-old autistic woman from Portland. Do you realize all the anger you're feeling about how we're portrayed isn't random? You're waking up to a truth most people still don't see. She was right. I was waking up. But the process wasn't gentle. As I discovered this vibrant online community of autistic self-advocates, I was confronted with a harsh reality. Offline, especially in the world of autism organizations, our voices were almost entirely absent. In 2002, when I was 15, I attended a local autism conference. My mom took me, thinking it would be educational. For 2 hours, I listened to doctors, therapists, researchers, and parents talk about autism. Statistics were cited, treatments debated, policies discussed. But not once, not a single time, was an autistic person invited to speak. I raised my hand during the Q&A. Why isn't there a single autistic speaker? I asked, my voice trembling with nervous indignation. The moderator looked genuinely confused. Well, we have several parents here who can speak about their experience. But why no actual autistic people? I insisted. An uncomfortable silence filled the room. Finally, a mother in the back spoke. Dear, many autistic people can't speak for themselves. That answer hit me like a punch to the gut. But because it implicitly denied the existence and legitimacy of those of us who could speak. It was as if our ability to communicate somehow disqualified us from being real autistics. Walking home that night, a cold, determined anger began to grow in my chest. Mom, I said, they're wrong. I can speak for myself. And I bet a lot of other autistic people can too. Then maybe, she replied gently, you should start speaking. Those words became my manifesto. In the years that followed, I became increasingly active in advocacy. I attended local school board meetings, speaking up for the needs of autistic students. I wrote letters to local newspapers, challenging problematic articles on autism. I started a blog called The Real Autism Voice, documenting the experiences of the online autistic community. But the pivotal moment came in 2005, during my senior year of high school. The New Jersey Assembly was considering special education legislation, and parent groups had mobilized to testify. Once again, I discovered no autistic person was scheduled to speak. I called the office of the committee chair. I'd like to testify as an autistic student, I told the secretary. How old are you? She asked. 17. You'll need a parent or guardian present. That's fine. But I want to speak for myself. There was a long pause. Let me check and get back to you. A week later, I received confirmation. I would be the first autistic person to testify before that specific committee. I prepared my testimony meticulously. I didn't want to speak only about my own experience. I wanted to represent the voices of all the autistic people I had met online, whose perspectives had never been heard in official settings. The day of my testimony arrived. The committee room was packed with parents, educators, and professionals. When my name was called, I felt the weight of every eye in the room. Some looked curious, others skeptical. Members of the committee, I began, my voice steadier than I expected. My name is Ryan Mitchell. I'm 17 years old, and I'm autistic. I am here not only to speak for myself, but to bring the voices of hundreds of autistic people I know who have never been invited to participate in these conversations. I spent the next 10 minutes sharing not just statistics and policy, but real stories. I talked about a 23-year-old autistic woman who wanted to be a teacher, but was discouraged because autistics can't handle noisy classrooms. I spoke about a 35-year-old man who had developed groundbreaking software, but whose contributions were ignored because he needed communication accommodations. I spoke about a teenager forced into traumatizing normalization therapies because she stimmed with her hands when happy. The question isn't whether autistic people can or should have a voice in policies affecting us, I concluded. The question is, why are we systematically excluded from these conversations? Why, when it comes to autism, is everyone considered an expert except autistic people themselves? The silence that followed was different from the discomfort I'd felt at the conference years before. It was silence filled with reflection. After my testimony, several legislators approached me. "Young man," said the committee chair, "that was enlightening. I've never thought about this issue that way." But the most meaningful comment came from a mother in the audience. "My son is 16 and autistic," she said, tears in her eyes. Did I ever ask what he really wanted to say? Driving home that night with my mom, I felt a clarity I had never experienced before. My purpose was crystal clear. It wasn't just advocacy, it was revolution. A quiet but fundamental revolution in how society sees people like me. "Mom," I said, watching the city lights blur past the window, "I think I know what I want to do with my life." "What's that?" she asked. "I want to make sure that no decision about autistic people is ever made again without autistic people in the room." Little did I know that promise would lead me to the heart of American political power and test every fiber of my determination in ways I could never have imagined. In August 2006, at 18, I stepped onto the campus of the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, with a clear mission. During the summer between high school and college, something extraordinary had happened. I decided it was time to turn online conversations and isolated testimonies into something bigger. It was time to create a real organization with a formal structure and clear goals. The idea came during a particularly frustrating discussion on an online forum. Sarah, a 28-year-old autistic woman from Michigan, had posted about a local policy that would eliminate support services for high-functioning autistic adults. "It's unbelievable," she wrote. "They're cutting our services, and when I tried to speak at the public hearing, they told me that since I can speak clearly, I obviously don't need support. As if the ability to articulate words means I have no other legitimate needs." Marcus, 32, from California, replied, "It's always the same. Either we're too functional to need help, or too dysfunctional to have a valid opinion. We're never considered functional enough to be heard." That exchange hit me hard. I realized we were facing a systemic problem that went beyond individual cases. We needed a collective, organized voice, one that could speak with authority on issues affecting us. That night, I called Scott Robertson, a 25-year-old autistic man from Texas who had become one of my closest collaborators online. Scott had a brilliant mind for organization and a passion for justice that matched my own. "Scott," I said, "what if we started a real organization? Something like Autistic Self-Advocacy Network?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Scott laughed. "Ryan, are you serious? An organization run by and for autistic people? Completely serious. Think about it. Does any other disability community lack its own voices leading advocacy organizations?" When you put it that way, Scott paused. "Okay, I'm in. But this is going to be a fight, you know. A lot of people aren't going to like it." He was right. But I was ready for the fight. I spent the fall of 2006 drafting what would become Autism's mission. Working late nights in my college dorm room between political science classes and homework, I wrote and rewrote our statement of principles. The Autistic Self-Advocacy Network seeks to advance the principles of the disability rights movement as they apply to autism. ASON believes the goal of autism advocacy should be a world in which autistic people enjoy equal access, rights, and opportunities. But the most important line was the one that became our motto: "Nothing about us without us." This phrase wasn't our invention. It had a long history in the disability rights movement, originating in apartheid-era South Africa and adopted by disability activists around the world. But for us, it perfectly captured our core philosophy. Autistic people have the fundamental right to be at the center of any conversation that affects our lives. In November 2006, we officially launched ASAN. Our first meeting was a video call with 8 people autistics ranging from 19 to 45, spread across 6 states. We had no office, no budget, no paid staff. What we had was something more powerful: a shared conviction that our voices mattered. "Folks," I said, looking at the pixelated faces on my laptop screen, "we're not just founding an organization. We're starting a movement." Amanda, now 29, and our West Coast coordinator, nodded. "The question is, are we ready for the consequences? Because once we start speaking publicly, some groups won't like it." She was referring to the big autism organizations, primarily Autism Speaks, founded in 2005, which had quickly become the dominant voice in autism advocacy. The problem was that Autism Speaks was built entirely around the perspective of parents and professionals. Its main focus was research into causes and cures, and its rhetoric often portrayed autism as a tragedy devastating families. "If they don't like it, Jim," the 40-year-old veteran who had inspired me years earlier replied, "then we're probably doing something right." Our first real test came sooner than we expected. In December 2007, we discovered an ad campaign that horrified us. The NYU Child Study Center had launched a series of ads called Ransom Notes, plastered across billboards in New York City. The ads were formatted like ransom letters, with words cut from newspapers, and read things like, "We have your child. Don't expect to see them again. we won't try to find them for decades, or maybe never. This is what autism can do. Signed, Autism. Another read. We have your daughter. She is still alive, but she is no longer living. She will not laugh, play, or make friends again. This is what ADHD can do. When I first saw these images, I felt a mix of rage and nausea I had never experienced. They weren't just offensive, they were dehumanizing. They portrayed neurological conditions as kidnappers and children like me as helpless victims stolen from their families. This is war, I told Scott during our emergency call that night. They're basically declaring that people like us have no right to exist. So, what do we do? He asked. We fight. What followed was our first coordinated campaign as an organization. We mobilized our online network, which had grown to about 200 active autistic members nationwide. We built a campaign website, drafted press releases, and launched a coordinated letter-writing campaign. But the turning point came when I decided to do something no autism organization had done before: organize a physical protest. Let's meet in front of the NYU Child Study Center, I announced on our forum. Let's show them that the people they portray as kidnapped are right here, speaking for ourselves. The response was immediate and passionate. Autistics from across the Northeast committed to come. Allied parents offered support. Even some professionals said they would participate. On December 17th, 2007, I stood on the sidewalk outside the NYU Child Study Center, holding a sign that read, "I was not kidnapped by autism. I am Ryan Mitchell, and I am right here." Around me were about 60 other autistics of all ages, parents, siblings, and allies. It was the first time in my life I had seen so many autistics physically gathered in one place, united by a common purpose. "Friends," I said, through a borrowed megaphone, "today we are not protesting the NYU Child Study Center just because their ads are offensive. We are protesting because they represent a mindset that sees us as tragedies instead of humans. That talks about us as if we were objects instead of people." The crowd cheered. Several TV cameras were present, and reporters circulated with questions. "Ryan," asked an NBC reporter, "some critics say that people like you, who can speak articulately about their experiences, don't represent the reality of most autistic people. How do you respond?" It was a question I had anticipated. "First," I said, "our movement includes autistics with a full range of support needs. Some of us communicate by typing rather than speaking. Some use assistive communication devices. Some communicate through behavior and body language. But we all have valid voices. Second, no one is claiming we are the only ones who can speak about autism. But we are saying our voices deserve to be in the conversation." The protest was a success beyond my wildest dreams. Within 3 days, the NYU Child Study Center announced they were pulling the Ransom Notes campaign. Stories about our protest appeared in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and dozens of other publications. But the most important impact came afterward. Our inbox flooded with messages from autistics across the country and the world. For the first time, wrote Jennifer, a 34-year-old autistic woman from Oregon, I feel like I have a community that will fight for me. You did what I always wanted to do, but never had the courage, said Michael, 26, from Atlanta. How can I help? Thank you for showing me I'm not alone, wrote Lisa, a 16-year-old autistic teen. My parents always told me I should be grateful to the experts who know what's best for me. Now, I see I can speak for myself. Within 2 weeks, our active membership had tripled. Local chapters began forming spontaneously. We received our first donation, checked $5 from a mother in Wisconsin whose autistic son had been inspired by our actions. Scott, I said during our debrief call, I think we inadvertently started something much bigger than we imagined. Not inadvertently, he corrected. This is exactly what we intended. The question now is, are we ready for what comes next? What came next was a dramatic escalation, both in our influence and in the resistance we faced. Traditional autism organizations began publicly attacking us. We received our first death threat, but we also received our first invitation to testify before Congress. The revolution we had started was gaining momentum, and I was about to discover that when you challenge entrenched power systems, they don't give up without a fight. The success of our campaign against the ransom notes was like lighting a wildfire in a dry forest. Suddenly, our small volunteer organization was at the center of a national media storm, and I found myself the public face of a movement growing faster than any of us had anticipated. The morning after our protest, I woke up to 127 unread emails and 23 voicemail messages. Reporters from across the country wanted interviews. Autistics wanted to join the movement. And, for the first time, we also faced our first wave of organized criticism. Ryan, my mother said, finding me at the kitchen table with my laptop open and papers scattered everywhere. Did you sleep? A few hours, I lied. In truth, I had spent the entire night responding to emails and preparing statements for the press. The adrenaline from our victory was keeping me awake. You're getting involved in something very big, she said, sitting next to me. Are you sure you're ready for this? It was a valid question. In less than 48 hours, I had involuntarily become the public spokesperson for a community of millions. The responsibility was overwhelming, but also thrilling. I said, looking at her for the first time in my life. I feel like I'm doing exactly what I'm meant to be doing. But my confidence would be severely tested in the days that followed. The first criticism came from Jonathan Shestak, co-founder of Cure Autism Now, which later merged with Autism Speaks. In a letter to the New York Times editor, he wrote, "While we acknowledge the right of high-functioning autistic individuals like Ryan Mitchell to express their opinions, it is concerning when they claim to speak for the entire autistic community. The reality is that many autistic people face severe challenges that Ryan Mitchell clearly does not. When he protests efforts to find treatments and cures, he is denying hope to families dealing daily with self-injurious behaviors, incontinence, and complete inability to communicate. The letter continued, "Ryan Mitchell can speak for himself, but he cannot speak for my 15-year-old son who has never uttered a word and spends his days banging his head against the wall. It is irresponsible to allow individuals like Mitchell to set the agenda for the entire autistic community." When I read that letter, it felt like a punch to the stomach. Not just because of the personal criticism, but because of the underlying implication. That because I could speak clearly, I was somehow not a real autistic. Or that my experience was somehow less valid. I immediately called Amanda, our West Coast coordinator. "Amanda, did you see the letter in the Times?" "I did. How are you handling it?" "I'm not sure I'm handling it well," I admitted. Part of me understands his point. I really do have privileges that many autistics don't. But, she encouraged. But he's creating a false dichotomy. As if having a voice means I'm trying to silence other autistics. And that's not what we're doing. Exactly. And Ryan, can I tell you something? My brother Danny is autistic and nonverbal. He's 23 now. And you know what he told me using his communication device when he saw our campaign on TV? "What?" he typed. "Finally, someone is fighting for us. Ryan, my brother, can't speak, but he can think. He can have opinions, and he's on our side." Amanda's words gave me the perspective I needed. We weren't speaking only for high-functioning autistics. We were speaking for the right of all autistics to be seen as full human beings, regardless of their support needs. I decided to respond publicly to Shestek's criticism. I wrote a letter that was published 3 days later. Mr. Shestek raises an important point about representation, but he misses the mark on our mission. ASAN does not claim to speak for every autistic individual. We claim to speak for the right of all autistics to be included in conversations about our lives. This includes autistics who communicate through typing, assistive devices, or other nonverbal means. The fundamental problem with campaigns like ransom notes is not that they recognize some autistics face significant challenges. The problem is that they portray all autistics as tragedies, as less than human, as burdens on society. This harms not only high-functioning autistics, but especially those with greater support needs who already face systemic dehumanization. When we fight for acceptance and support rather than cure, we are not denying that some autistics require intensive help. We are arguing that this help should come from a place of respect for our humanity, not an attempt to make us normal. The response was immediate and polarized. We received hundreds of supportive emails, but also our first serious wave of organized hostility. "You are a privileged arrogant who has no idea of real suffering," wrote a mother from Minnesota. "My son hurts himself every day. Are you denying him the right to treatment?" "Ryan Mitchell is dangerous," posted someone on a parent forum. "He's convincing people that autism is just a difference, when in reality, it's a devastating disability that needs to be cured." But The comments that affected me most came from other autistics who disagreed with our approach. "Maybe Mitchell is lucky," wrote Tom, a 28-year-old autistic, on a blog, "but I struggle every day. I have severe anxiety, depression, and sensory challenges that make it impossible to hold a job. If there were a pill to cure me, I'd take it in a second. He has no right to tell me I shouldn't want that." This criticism hit me deeper than any other because it came from within our own community. I spent hours reflecting on it because Tom had a valid point. Who was I to tell another autistic how to feel about their own experience? It was Jim Sinclair, the veteran activist who had inspired me years earlier, who helped me navigate this complexity during a long phone conversation. "Ryan," he said, "you are confusing two different issues. One is the individual right of each person to pursue any treatment that helps them live better. The other is the social and political rhetoric that portrays our existence as inherently tragic." "Explain," I asked. "If Tom wants treatment for his anxiety and depression, that's his right, and we can support it. But when organizations say autism kidnaps children, or families are destroyed by autism, there's a difference between helping autistic people live better and suggesting the world would be better without autistic people." This distinction became central to how we refined our message in the months that followed. We were not against treatment or support. We were against dehumanizing rhetoric. We were not against medical research. We were against research that focused exclusively on prevention and cure while ignoring quality of life. Our stance, I wrote in a blog post that became one of our most widely shared statements, is simple. Autistic people deserve better lives, not fewer lives. That means access to education, employment, housing, healthcare, and community supports. It means being treated with dignity and respect. It means having our voices included in decisions that affect us. The response from the autistic community was overwhelming. Within 2 weeks, we received over 400 emails from autistics worldwide wanting to get involved. "You articulated something I've felt for years but couldn't express," wrote Rebecca, a 31-year-old autistic from England. "I don't hate being autistic. I hate how society treats me for being autistic for the first time," wrote David, 25, from Canada. "I feel I can be proud of who I am instead of constantly trying to hide or fix myself." But perhaps the most touching email came from Maria, a 42-year-old mother from Texas. "Ryan, I am the mother of an 8-year-old autistic boy. When I first learned about your work, my initial reaction was defensive. I thought, how can he understand what we go through? But then I watched one of your online interviews, and something clicked. I realized I had been so focused on fixing my son that I forgot to ask what he really needed. Last week, instead of taking him to another ABA therapy session, I asked what he wanted to do. He said he wanted to go to the park and teach me about dinosaurs. We spent 3 hours in the park, and it was the first time in months I saw him genuinely happy. Thank you for reminding me that my son is not a problem to be solved. It is a person to be understood. These emails reminded me why we had started this work. It wasn't about winning arguments or scoring political points. It was about fundamentally changing how society viewed people like us. In March 2008, 3 months after our ransom notes campaign, I received a phone call that would completely change the trajectory of our movement. Ryan Mitchell, Ka, said the voice on the other end. Yes, that's me. My name is Jennifer Johnson, and I work for the Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions. Senator Tom Harkin would like to invite you to testify at a hearing on autism policy. I went silent for a moment, unable to process what I was hearing. Mr. Mitchell, are you still there? Yes, sorry. You're serious. The United States Senate. Completely serious. This will be the first time an autistic person testifies at a Senate hearing on autism policy. We look forward to hearing your perspective. After hanging up, I sat in silence for 10 minutes, trying to absorb what had just happened. In less than 2 years, we had gone from a small online community to an organization invited to influence federal policy. Mom, I yelled down the hall. You won't believe what just happened. But even as I celebrated this milestone, a part of me knew we were only at the beginning. We had won our first battle, but the war for self-representation was just beginning. And the most powerful forces in the autism world had yet to strike their strongest blow. It was a cold December afternoon in 2009 when my life changed forever. I was in my small, messy apartment in College Park, Maryland, finishing my political science thesis when my phone rang. The number on the caller ID was from Washington, D.C., but I didn't recognize it. Ryan Mitchell, I answered, expecting another reporter or maybe a student needing help with a project on autism. Mr. Mitchell, this is David Chen from the White House Personnel Office. The President would like to consider you for a federal appointment. Do you have a few minutes to talk? I dropped the pen I was holding. For a moment, I thought it was an elaborate prank. Sorry, could you repeat that? Mr. Mitchell, President Obama is considering nominating you to the National Council on Disability. It is a presidential appointment that requires Senate confirmation. Would you be interested in discussing this? My heart started pounding so hard, I could hear it in my ears. The National Council on Disability knew exactly what it was. It was the independent federal council advising the President and Congress on disability policy. It was one of the most influential positions in the disability policy world. Mr. Mitchell, are you still there? Yes, sorry. Yes, I would definitely be interested in discussing this. Excellent. Can we schedule a formal call for tomorrow? There will be some questions about your background and qualifications. After hanging up, I sat in complete silence for 5 full minutes. Then, suddenly, reality hit me like a lightning bolt. If this nomination were confirmed, I would become the first autistic person in history to serve on the National Council on Disability. The first autistic person in a high-profile federal position. The first autistic person to have an official voice in policies affecting our community. I immediately called Scott Robertson, my co-founder at Asan. Scott, are you sitting down? Why? What happened now? Another organization attacking us? No, the White House wants to nominate me to the National Council on Disability." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Ryan, you're joking." "I'm not joking. I just spoke with someone from the Presidential Personnel Office. Man, do you realize what this means? This is historic." He was right, but it was also terrifying. In the 3 years since ASIN's founding, I had gotten used to speaking as an activist, as an outsider, criticizing the system. Now, potentially, I was being invited inside the system to be part of the official machinery making disability policy decisions. The formal White House call took place the next day. David Chen asked detailed questions about my experience, my vision for disability policy, and my ability to work collaboratively with other council members. "Mr. Mitchell," he said at the end of the interview, "may I ask how you see your potential role on the council? Would you be appointed as a representative of the autistic community specifically, or would your perspective be broader?" It was an important question, and I had thought about it all night. "Mr. Chen, certainly my experience as an autistic person would inform my perspective, but I see my role as representing the interests of the entire disability community. Autism does not exist in a vacuum. We face many of the same systemic challenges as people with other disabilities. Employment, discrimination, educational barriers, lack of access to services. At the same time, I can bring a perspective of self-advocacy that has historically been absent from these conversations." Interesting. And how would you respond to criticism that your personal experience may not be representative of all autistics? I would say no one person can fully represent any diverse community. But what I can offer is the perspective of someone who has lived as an autistic person and spent years listening to and amplifying the voices of hundreds of other autistics through our work at ASIN. Most importantly, I can ensure that conversations about autistics, not just people talking about us. Very well. We will be in touch soon. A week later, I received official confirmation. President Obama would nominate me to the National Council on Disability. The nomination would be publicly announced on December 16, 2009. I spent the following week in a mixture of euphoria and terror. On one hand, it was the fulfillment of everything we had worked for: real autistic representation in positions of power. On the other hand, I knew this would make me an even bigger target for criticism. I called my mother to share the news. "Ryan, I'm so proud of you," she said, and I could hear that she was crying. "Do you remember that conversation in the park when you were 12? How could I forget? That day, I was so worried about how the world would treat you for being different. I never imagined your difference would become your strength. Mom, it hasn't been confirmed by the Senate yet. This may not amount to anything." "It will," she said with conviction. "You were born for this." Her confirmation meant everything to me, but I knew not everyone would share her enthusiasm. On the day of the announcement, I received a call from Jennifer Johnson, the same Senate aide who had invited me to testify years earlier. "Ryan, congratulations on the nomination. It is well deserved." "Thank you, Jennifer. But may I ask, what do you think the reaction will be?" Honestly, she paused. "Ryan, are you prepared for a battle? Because some people are not going to like this. What kind of people? The kind of people who believe they own the autism conversation. She was, of course, referring to the major autism organizations, and she was right to be concerned. 2 hours after the White House's official announcement, my phone began ringing non-stop. Reporters wanted comments. Activists wanted to congratulate me, but the first negative reactions also began to arrive. The first came from Jonathan Shestak of Autism Speaks in a statement to the press. While we respect President Obama's right to make his own appointments, we question whether Ryan Mitchell, with his limited perspective of the autism spectrum, can adequately represent the needs of the entire autistic community, especially those with more severe autism. Then came an even harsher statement from Bob Wright, co-founder of Autism Speaks. Ryan Mitchell represents a very small faction of the autistic community, those opposed to research for treatments and cures. Most families affected by autism want hope, not acceptance of permanent limitations. But it was a post on the blog Age of Autism that truly shook me. Ryan Mitchell's nomination is an insult to all families dealing daily with real autism. Mitchell does not have severe autism. He can speak, write, attend college. He does not represent my child, who has never spoken a word and requires 24-hour care. How can someone like this make policy decisions affecting truly disabled children? Reading that was like a punch to the gut. Not just because of the personal cruelty, but because of the implication that I was somehow not truly autistic for having developed certain abilities. I called Amanda, our veteran coordinator, who had become my closest confidant in difficult times. Amanda, I'm starting to wonder if I'm doing the right thing. What if they're right? What if I really cannot adequately represent people with greater needs than mine? Ryan, she said firmly, stop. You're letting them into your head. Do you think I would support your nomination if I thought you couldn't represent our community? No, but no buts. Ryan, my brother, Danny, cannot speak verbally, but he communicates. And do you know what he said when he learned of your nomination? He typed on his device. Finally, someone like us in government, not someone speaking for us. Someone like us. Her words gave me the strength I needed. But I still had no idea how brutal the battle for confirmation would become. 3 days after the nomination, I received a call that would change everything again. Mr. Mitchell, this is Sarah Collins from Senator Tom Coburn's office. The senator would like to inform you that he is placing a hold on your nomination. A hold. What does that mean? It means your confirmation is suspended indefinitely, pending further review. May I ask why? The senator has concerns about your qualifications and whether your views are representative of the community you would claim to serve. After hanging up, I sat in silence. A Senate hold meant that a single senator could block my confirmation indefinitely, and they didn't even need to reveal their identity publicly. The battle for my confirmation and for the soul of the autistic self-advocacy movement was only beginning. The Senate hold on my nomination was like opening the floodgates of hostility that had been building for years. Suddenly, organizations that presented themselves as autism advocates were actively working to prevent a real autistic person from holding a position of political influence. The irony was both devastating and absurd. In the first days after the hold was announced, I tried to remain optimistic. "It's just politics," I told Scott during one of our daily calls. "It'll probably get resolved in a few weeks." But Scott, who had become my reality check over the years, didn't share my optimism. "Ryan, have you seen what they're saying about you online? This isn't just politics. This is personal." He was referring to a coordinated campaign that had begun across multiple blogs and autistic parent forums. The criticism wasn't just about policy, was direct attacks on my character, my authenticity, and my right to exist as an autistic person. "Ryan Mitchell is an imposter," wrote Kim Stagliano, editor of the Age of Autism blog. "He can speak eloquently, write articles, attend meetings. This is not real autism. Real autism is my son, who wears diapers at 15 and bangs his head against the wall. Micho has no moral right to make decisions affecting truly disabled children." Another post, which went viral among parent circles, read, "Ryan Mitchell represents the privileged autistics who want to deny treatment to children desperately in need. While he goes to college and gives TV interviews, our children suffer in silence." His nomination is an insult to all families dealing with severe autism, but it was an open letter published on the Autism Speaks website that truly hit me. "Dear President Obama, as families affected by autism, we are deeply concerned about your nomination of Ryan Mitchell to the National Council on Disability. While we respect Mitchell's right to express his opinions, we question his ability to adequately represent our community. Mitchell is a vocal proponent of the neurodiversity ideology that opposes efforts to find treatments and cures for autism. He regularly downplays the challenges faced by individuals with severe autism and their families. His positions are not only outside the mainstream, they are potentially harmful to those who need help the most. We respectfully request that you reconsider this nomination in favor of someone who truly understands and represents the needs of the entire autistic community. Sincerely," followed by 847 signatures. When I read that letter, I felt a mix of anger and sadness unlike anything I had ever experienced. Not just because of the personal attack, but because it completely distorted our positions. We had never opposed treatments that helped autistic people live better lives. We opposed the rhetoric that dehumanized us and research focused solely on eliminating us. I called Jim Sinclair, the veteran activist who had mentored me for years. "Jim, I'm starting to wonder if I should withdraw my nomination. Maybe they're right. Maybe I'm not the right person for this." "Ryan," he said in that calm voice I had learned to value, "you're letting them define the terms of the debate. The question isn't whether you are autistic enough, or whether you can represent every individual autistic person. The question is, do autistic people deserve to have a voice in the policies that affect us? Of course we do. Then why are you questioning it now? Because maybe they're right," that I don't understand people with greater needs than mine. Ryan, you've already spoken with hundreds of autistics, with every type of support need through Asan. You've advocated for accommodations, services, and rights for autistics of all abilities. Why are your experiences and knowledge suddenly invalid? He was right, but emotionally, I was shaken. The campaign against me had become so intense that it was affecting my mental health. The low point came when I received my first death threat. It was an email sent from an anonymous account. Ryan Mitchell, you are a plague on the autistic community. People like you give real autism a bad name. You should have your tongue cut out for suggesting that autistics don't need a cure. It would be better for everyone if you just disappeared permanently. When I showed the email to my mother, she went pale. Ryan, this has gone too far. You need to contact the police. Mom, it's probably just someone venting online. It's not a real threat. How can you know? These people are clearly willing to go very far to stop you. She was right. I contacted the local police, who opened a report, but said there wasn't much they could do unless the threats became more specific. But support also began arriving from unexpected places. I received a call from Temple Grandin, the world's most famous autistic person. Ryan, this is Temple Grandin. I wanted you to know I support your nomination. I was momentarily speechless. Temple was a legend, someone whose work had opened doors for all of us. Dr. Grandin, it's an honor to hear from you. Ryan, the people attacking you are wrong. You have the right to be in this position. More importantly, the autistic community needs you in this position. Thank you. That means a lot coming from you. Listen, there will always be people who think they know what's best for us better than we do. But you cannot let them silence you. Our community has fought too hard to get where we are. The call gave me renewed strength, but the battle was far from over. 2 weeks later, I received a call from Daniel Pfeiffer, White House Communications Director. Ryan, I need to be blunt with you. We have senators receiving hundreds of calls daily asking them to block your confirmation. Mr. Pfeiffer, may I ask, does the White House still support me? The president still believes you are the right person for the job, but we need to find a way to change the narrative. The campaign against you is well organized and well funded. What do you suggest? Respected people in the disability community, parents who support your approach, professionals who work with autistics. Can you mobilize that kind of support? I can try. What followed was a grassroots campaign unlike anything I had experienced before. Amanda coordinated efforts on the West Coast. Scott mobilized our chapters in the South, and we began building a coalition of support. The first letters of support came from autistics across the country. I'm a 45-year-old autistic children. Ryan Mitchell is the voice our community has been waiting for decades. He does not claim to speak for all of us, but he fights for all of us to be heard. I'm 28, autistic, and work as a software engineer. People attacking Ryan Mitchell are attacking the right of people like us to exist in society. His nomination is about representation, not denying services to those in need. Then letters came from supportive parents. I'm the mother of a 12-year-old autistic boy. Ryan Mitchell and Asa have taught me to see my son not as a problem to be fixed, but as a person to be understood and supported. Ryan represents real hope, not false promises of cures. And from professionals. As a psychologist working with autistic families for 20 years, I fully support Ryan Mitchell's nomination. His first-hand perspective is exactly what current policies are missing. But we also discovered something disturbing about the campaign against me. Through public records research, we found that many of the organization had financial ties to pharmaceutical and biotech companies that would benefit from research focused on cures. Ryan, said Marcus, one of our volunteer researchers, you won't believe what we found. Autism Speaks received over $2 million last year from companies developing autism treatments. They have a financial interest in maintaining the narrative that autism is a disease that needs curing. The revelation was eye-opening, but also frightening. We weren't just fighting philosophical differences, we were fighting powerful economic interests. Scott, I said during one of our late-night calls, sometimes I wonder if we're fighting giants. Maybe we are, he replied. But you know what David did to Goliath? His biblical reference made me smile for the first time in weeks. But I still didn't know that the hardest part of the battle was yet to come. March 2010 brought a revelation that completely changed my understanding of the political situation I was in. Daniel Pfeiffer from the White House called me with news that was simultaneously encouraging and alarming. Ryan, we have good news and bad news. The good news is we've identified who is holding up your nomination. The bad news is it's not just one person. What do you mean? There are at least 3 senators who have placed holds. Tom Coburn from Oklahoma, which we expected, but also Jim Damon from South Carolina and Jeff Sessions from Alabama. This suggests a coordinated campaign. My stomach sank. A hold from one senator was already difficult to overcome. 3 holds from senators from different states indicated something far more organized. Mr. Pfeiffer, does this mean my nomination is dead? Not necessarily, but it does mean we'll need a different strategy. And Ryan, there's something else you need to know. What? We've received information that paid lobbyists are visiting Senate offices specifically to oppose your nomination. This goes beyond grassroots. Someone is spending serious money to stop you. The revelation left me stunned. One thing was facing opposition from genuinely concerned families. Another, entirely different, was discovering that there was a professional, funded campaign to take me down. Who's paying for this? We can't confirm publicly, but there are strong indications that organizations connected to the pharmaceutical and biotech industries are involved. Ryan, you've become a threat to a very lucrative ecosystem. After hanging up, I sat in my college apartment, trying to process what I had just heard. My nomination wasn't just about autistic representation. It had become a proxy war between different visions for the future of our community, with a lot of money at stake. I called Amanda immediately. Amanda, we're dealing with something much bigger than we imagined. I figured that out, she replied grimly. Ryan, I need to tell you what we discovered here on the West Coast. We have evidence that Autism Speaks hired a PR firm to organize the campaign against you. The same firm that works for pharmaceutical companies. How did you find that out? A source inside the organization. Someone who is horrified by what's happening. Ryan, they have an internal document that literally calls your nomination an existential threat to our funding objectives. The reality was even worse than I had imagined. I wasn't just fighting philosophical disagreements, was fighting an entire system with economic interests in keeping autistic people as objects of study and treatment, never as agents of our own lives. In the following days, the pressure intensified dramatically. I began receiving calls from investigative journalists interested in the story behind my opposition. Mr. Mitchell, said Jake Pearson from the Washington Post, we're investigating the sources of funding behind the campaign against your nomination. Would you be willing to speak about what you've discovered? I can share what I know, I replied cautiously. Our records show that at least $200,000 has been spent on lobbying specifically related to your nomination in the past 2 months. That's an extraordinary sum for an individual nomination. Do you have any idea why someone would spend so much money to stop you? The question forced me to articulate something that had been crystallizing in my mind for weeks. Mr. Pearson, I think my nomination represents something that some groups find frightening. The idea that autistic people can and should speak for ourselves. There's a lot of money being made talking about us. Research that studies us as objects. Treatments that attempt to normalize us. Organizations raising millions, using our image, but without our participation. If autistic people begin to have a real voice in politics, it changes everything. That's a serious accusation. It's not an accusation. It's an observation. The numbers speak for themselves. Billions of dollars are spent annually on autism research. But less than 1% goes to research on quality of life or supports that autistics actually want. The Washington Post article was published a week later under the headline, "The Autism Wars. Big Money Behind Opposition to First Autistic Presidential Nominee." It caused an immediate uproar. Organizations that had attacked me now found themselves on the defensive, having to explain their funding sources and corporate connections. But the article also intensified attacks against me. I received more threats, more hateful emails, more blog posts questioning everything from my intelligence to my humanity. The turning point came from an unexpected source, John McCain. In April 2010, I received a call from Mark Salter, McCain's aide. "Mr. Mitchell, Senator McCain would like to meet with you. He is considering publicly supporting your nomination." I was shocked. McCain was a Republican, a veteran, and certainly not someone I expected to support my progressive positions on disability rights. May I ask why? The senator has a long history of supporting disability rights. But more importantly, he believes in fair play. And he thinks the campaign against you has crossed the line of fair play. The meeting was scheduled for the following week at McCain's office in the Capitol. I was nervous. I had never been in the Capitol before, and certainly never met with an American senator. McCain greeted me in his office, a tall, imposing man with white hair and a presence that commanded immediate respect. "Mr. Mitchell," he said, shaking my hand firmly, "thank you for coming. Please, have a seat." We sat in leather chairs in front of his desk. "Mr. Mitchell, I'll be direct. I've read about you, your organization, the controversies. I have a few questions, of course, Senator. First question, is it true that you oppose medical research on autism?" "No, Senator. I oppose research that focuses solely on preventing or eliminating autistic people. I support research on quality of life, accommodations, and supports that help us live better." Second question, is it true that you claim to represent all autistics? "No, Senator. No one person can represent an entire community. But I believe autistic people deserve a voice in policies that affect us alongside parents, professionals, and other stakeholders." Third question, do you believe some autistic people require intensive care and support? "Absolutely. And we fight for that support. The difference is that we believe that support should come from a place of respect for human dignity, not an attempt to fix or cure something that is fundamentally part of who we are. McCain studied me for a long moment. "Mr. Mitchell, I've served alongside many courageous men in my career. I recognize courage when I see it. What you're doing, standing up to powerful interests to give your community a voice, that is courage." "Thank you, Senator, but let me finish. I also recognize bullying when I see it. And what's happening to you is systematic bullying. It's not about your qualifications or positions. It's about keeping people like you out of positions of power." He paused, then continued, "I will publicly support your nomination, and I will speak with my colleagues about removing these holds." "Senator McCain, I don't know what to say. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. The battle isn't over. But you are not fighting alone." 2 weeks later, McCain issued a public statement supporting my nomination. Other senators began to follow suit. The tide was turning, slowly. In May 2010, I received a call that would change everything completely. "Ryan, this is Daniel Pfeiffer. I have news. Good or bad? Good. The holds have been lifted. All of them." "What does that mean?" "It means your nomination can proceed to a vote. Ryan, you will have your confirmation hearing." After hanging up, I sat in silence for 10 minutes. After nearly 6 months of brutal battle, I would finally have the chance to defend my nomination publicly. But I also knew the hearing would be the ultimate test. If I could not convince the Senate committee that I deserved the position, everything we had fought for would have been in vain. The date was set, June 15th, 2010. In less than a month, I would be sitting before a committee of American senators, defending not only my own nomination, but the right of the entire autistic community to have a voice in the policies that affected us. It was the opportunity we had waited for decades. But it was also the most intense pressure I had ever faced in my life. The morning of June 15th, 2010, dawned clear and warm in Washington, D.C. I woke at 5 a.m. in the small hotel where I was staying, unable to sleep any longer. In a few hours, I would be sitting before the Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions, defending my nomination to the National Council on Disability. My mother had flown in from New Jersey to be with me. I met her in the hotel lobby at 6:30, both of us too nervous to eat a proper breakfast. "How are you feeling?" she asked as we walked through the still quiet streets of D.C. Terrified and hopeful at the same time, I admitted. "Mom, do you realize that if this works out, nothing will ever be the same again?" "I'm sure it will work out," she said, taking my arm. "You've been preparing for this your whole life, even without knowing it." We arrived at the Senate building at 8 a.m. The hallway outside the hearing room was crowded. I saw familiar faces from the autistic community who had traveled from across the country to attend. Amanda was there with her brother Danny, who had brought his communication device for the occasion. Scott Robertson had driven overnight from Texas. Jim Sinclair, my longtime mentor, waved to me from the back of the hallway. But I also saw hostile faces. Representatives from organizations that had attacked me for months were present. Some carrying signs with slogans like "Real Autism needs real representation," and "Don't let high functioning autism speak for low functioning." Daniel Pfeiffer from the White House met me before the hearing began. "Ryan, how are you feeling?" "Ready?" I replied, trying to project more confidence than I actually felt. "Remember, you're not just speaking for yourself today. You're speaking for the possibility that all autistic people can have a voice in their own lives. This is bigger than any of us." At 10 a.m., I was called into the hearing room. It was imposing high ceilings, dark wood panels, and a U-shaped desk where senators sat like judges. I sat at a small table in the center, microphones pointed at me, and C-SPAN cameras recording every movement. The committee chair, Senator Tom Harkin, opened the session. "We are here today to consider the nomination of Ryan Mitchell to the National Council on Disability. This is a historic nomination, as Mr. Mitchell would be the first autistic person to serve on this council. Mr. Mitchell, you have 10 minutes for your opening statement." I looked at the gallery, seeing the faces of people who had supported me through the hardest months of my life. I took a deep breath and began. "Mr. Chairman, distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. My name is Ryan Mitchell. I am 22 years old, graduating in political science from the University of Maryland, and I am autistic. I did not begin with these credentials by accident. I want to make it clear from the start. I am not here in spite of being autistic. I am here because I am autistic. My lived experience as an autistic person is not a limitation to overcome it, is a perspective I can contribute. Over the past 6 months, I have heard criticism that I cannot adequately represent the autistic community because I have certain abilities that not all autistic people have. I want to address this directly. First, I have never claimed to represent every individual autistic person. That would be impossible and arrogant. But I do represent something crucial: the possibility for autistic people to have a voice in policies that affect us. Second, through my organization, the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, I have worked with autistic people across the full spectrum of needs. Some communicate verbally, others through typing, others via assistive devices, and others through nonverbal behavior and expression. All have valid perspectives that deserve to be heard. Third, the challenges I face as an autistic person: employment discrimination, educational barriers, social stigma, difficulties accessing services. These are the same systematic challenges faced by autistic people of all support needs. I paused, looking directly at the senators. Senators, the question is not whether I am autistic enough for this position. The question is, do autistic people deserve to have a voice in the policies that affect us? If the answer is yes, then someone needs to take the first step. I am honored and prepared to be that person. If confirmed, I will work to ensure the National Council on Disability considers the needs of all people with disabilities, including autistic people with all levels of support needs. I will advocate for policies based not on pity or fear, but on recognition of our fundamental humanity and our right to self-determination. I am not here to deny that some autistic people face significant challenges. I am here to ensure that solutions to those challenges come from a place of respect for our dignity, not attempts to eliminate or fix us. Thank you for your time and consideration. Senator Harkin nodded. Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. We will now proceed to questions. Senator Coburn. Tom Coburn, one of the senators who had placed a hold on my nomination, leaned forward. Mr. Mitchell, do you oppose medical research on autism? No, Senator. I oppose research that focuses solely on prevention and elimination. I strongly support research on quality of life, accommodations, treatments for co-occurring conditions such as anxiety and depression, and the development of assistive technologies. But you do not support research for a cure. Senator, the issue of cure is complex. If by cure you mean helping autistic people live fuller, happier lives, I am fully in favor. But if by cure you mean eliminating neurological traits that are a fundamental part of who we are, then no, I do not support that. Senator Mike Enzi of Wyoming asked the next question. Mr. Mitchell, how would you respond to families who say you don't understand the challenges they face? Senator Enzi, I would say I understand more than they think. Through ASAN, I have spoken with hundreds of families. I know that many face real challenges: lack of services, educational discrimination, financial difficulties. But the solution is not to make autistic people disappear. The solution is to build a more inclusive and accessible society. Questions continued for an hour on specific policies, my experience, and my vision for the future. With each question, I felt I was not just defending my nomination, but defining what it meant to be autistic and have a voice. Finally, Senator Harkin asked the closing question. Mr. Mitchell, if confirmed, what would be your #1 priority? Senator Harkin, my priority would be to ensure that disability policies are made with people with disabilities, not just for them. For too long, decisions about our lives have been made in rooms where we were not present. If confirmed, I will work to change that, not just for autistic people, but for the entire disability community. Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. The hearing is adjourned. The committee will meet in executive session tomorrow to vote on the nomination. As I left the hearing room, I was surrounded by supporters and reporters. Amanda hugged me with tears in her eyes. Ryan, you were perfect, absolutely perfect. But I knew the true test would come with the committee vote the next day. I lay awake, thinking of all the autistic people who had reached out to me over the months, sharing their stories, their hopes, their fears for the future. Thinking of the responsibility I was taking on. On the morning of June 16th, I received a call from Daniel Pfeiffer at 8:30. Ryan, the committee voted. You were approved by 13-7, and now it goes to the full Senate. Ryan, you are days away from making history. On June 22nd, 2010, at 3:47 p.m., the United States Senate unanimously voted to confirm my nomination to the National Council on Disability. 47 years after the first federal disability rights legislation was passed, an autistic person finally had an official voice in the policies that affected us. When I received the call confirming the vote, I was in my college apartment, surrounded by friends from Asan who had come to watch the historic moment on television. Everyone, I said, hanging up the phone, we did it. What followed was a celebration, but also a deep reflection on what we had achieved and what still needed to be done. This is my story, the story of how a conversation on a park bench became a seat on the presidential council. But more importantly, it is the story of a movement that proved that when we refuse to be silenced, when we insist on nothing about us without us, we can change the world. Our struggle continues. There is still much work to be done. Autistic people still face discrimination, still fight for adequate services, still are spoken about more than listened to. But we proved something fundamental. Our voice matters. Our perspective is valid, and our right to self-determination is non-negotiable. If this story has inspired you, if you believe autistic people, low people with disabilities deserve a voice in their own lives, then you are part of this movement. Share this story with someone who needs to hear that change is possible. Like if you believe our neurological diversity makes the world richer, not poorer. And subscribe for more stories that need to be told, because our fight for dignity, respect, and self-determination is just beginning. Remember, nothing about us without us. And together, we are changing what it means to be different in a world that is finally learning to listen.
Note: this narrative is inspired by the real-life story of Ari Neiman, an American disability rights activist. Ari co-founded the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, ASAN, in 2006 and in 2009, became the first openly autistic person nominated by President Barack Obama to serve on the National Council on Disability. Some names, locations, and details have been adapted for narrative purposes, but the core events and historical impact remain faithful to his real journey.